The United Nations Hall has seen countless speeches, fiery debates, and even walkouts, but nothing could have prepared the world for what unfolded when Burkina Faso's young leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, took the stage. With the eyes of the world fixed on him, Traoré didn't just deliver a speech, he dropped a political thunderstorm. In front of stunned diplomats, he issued a bold 48-hour ultimatum directly aimed at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The world gasped. What could possibly drive Africa's youngest president to confront one of the most powerful and controversial leaders on earth? Why now? And what was the real message hidden inside this ultimatum? As Traoré's words echoed through the chamber, whispers turned into frantic phone calls. Western delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Representatives from the Middle East leaned forward, sensing history in the making. For decades, African leaders have spoken about injustice, colonial legacies, and the need for dignity. But Traoré's words cut through with an urgency and fearlessness rarely seen in global politics. The ultimatum was simple, yet staggering. Netanyahu, he declared, had 48 hours to respond to Africa's demand for respect, recognition, and an end to policies that, in Traoré's words, threaten not just Palestine, but the sovereignty of every free nation that resists Western control. Diplomats froze. The weight of those words was undeniable. International media scrambled. CNN called it a shockwave across the UN floor. Al Jazeera described it as a moment that redefined Africa's voice in world politics. And social media exploded. Clips of Traoré's speech flooded TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. Some hailed him as Africa's lion, finally roaring at the injustices long ignored by global powers. Others dismissed it as reckless bravado, warning it could isolate Burkina Faso from the very powers it needs. But here's the twist. Traoré's ultimatum wasn't just about Israel and Palestine. It was about something far bigger, Africa's sovereignty in a world still dominated by Western and Eastern giants. Behind the direct challenge to Netanyahu was a deeper warning to the entire global order. Africa will no longer be silent. Sources close to African Union diplomats later revealed that Traoré's speech had been months in the making, coordinated quietly with several Sahel nations. According to one leaked report from African Union briefings, the young leader had been pushing for a new policy of digital and political sovereignty, framing Africa as the next frontier of resistance against Western dominance. His bold move at the UN was the opening shot. The reactions were swift. Netanyahu reportedly held an emergency call with his security advisors just hours after the speech. The Israeli press blasted Traoré as an inexperienced populist seeking attention. But in Arab media, the headlines were very different. Africa joins the call against occupation. It was clear Traoré's words had struck a nerve. Washington wasn't silent either. According to an early report in the New York Times, U.S. officials warned that Burkina Faso risked serious consequences if it continued down this confrontational path. France, already furious over being pushed out of the Sahel, condemned the speech as dangerous rhetoric. Yet in African cities, from Dakar to Nairobi, crowds reportedly gathered to watch clips of Traoré's words, cheering as though their own voices were finally heard on the world stage. The 48-hour ultimatum became a countdown clock for speculation. Would Netanyahu respond? Would the UN intervene? Or was this all a symbolic gesture meant to rally Africa and shame the West? Analysts debated fiercely. Some argued that Traoré was taking a page from the playbook of leaders like Hugo Chavez or even Donald Trump, using spectacle and bold threats to gain global attention. Others insisted it was more than theater, that Traoré was setting Africa on a collision course with the old order. By the second day, the pressure was unbearable. Rumors swirled that Netanyahu might respond through back channels, while Israeli diplomats lobbied frantically to defuse the situation. According to a report cited by The Guardian, European Union officials even attempted to mediate quietly, fearing the confrontation could spiral into a wider diplomatic crisis. But here's where things took an even more dramatic turn. As the 48-hour deadline ticked down, Traoré doubled down. In a follow-up press briefing, he declared that if Africa's voice continued to be ignored, nations across the continent would begin rethinking their participation in UN forums dominated by Western interests. It was a shot across the bow, not just to Israel, but to Washington, Paris, and Brussels. The world had to ask itself, was this the birth of a new African diplomacy, one unafraid of naming names and issuing ultimatums? Or was it the reckless gamble of a young leader challenging powers far bigger than his nation could withstand? Either way, the damage, or the breakthrough, was done. Africa, through Traoré, had made itself impossible to ignore. For too long, the continent's leaders were expected to play it safe, to condemn politely but never threaten action. Traoré shattered that mold. And whether you see him as a hero or a firebrand, one thing is certain: the aftershocks of his ultimatum will be felt far beyond the UN hall. Because when a young African leader dares to confront the West, Israel, and the entire global order in one sweeping move, the question isn't whether the world was listening. The question is, what happens next? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.